Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fringe Legal Virtual Summit. I am so excited to have you all here today. I can see there's a number of people joining now, so welcome, and we'll give you guys a couple of seconds before we start. And the first session of the day is one I've been looking forward to for a while. It is with Richard Tromans. Richard is based out of London, and he is a founder of Tromans Consulting, which advises legal businesses on strategy and innovation, including advising on adoption of AI system. He also runs the hugely popular site Artificial Lawyer, which many of you might know him from, which is a site dedicated to new developments in legal AI and automation. He's been working in the legal sector for over 20 years and has been a strategic advisor, market analyst, and explorer of legal innovation. So Richard, thank you very much. Welcome.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And we'll have no doubt a very lively discussion. And part of the impetus for this was I reached out to you because you are a legal economist. And I think what's going on in the economy right now, there's been pressure building within the legal profession slowly for some time. And we're getting to that inflection point where things are changing quickly, especially accelerated by the current crisis we find ourselves in. And this will have an impact on economics. This will increase the price pressures on firms and corporates even more so. So I guess a good place to start would be, in the last 20 years as you've been doing this, if you can summarize that for us, what's that been like? What's the foundation, and what are you starting to see now?
Okay. Well, okay. To put it simply, 20 years ago, for the large commercial law firms, the main strategic issue was globalization. Mm-hmm. It's kind of hard to remember now, but in the same way that everyone is always talking about innovation, particularly me, the subject of the decade, really, sort of late 90s to early 2000s, was globalization. It was on everybody's mind. You have to remember that some of the largest law firms in the world today were just a couple of hundred partners in the late 90s. They had very small satellite offices around the world. And with the expansion of the WTO, with China joining the WTO, with NAFTA in North America, with the EU really starting to have an effect, because the EU is really sort of starting to come together. And again, it's sort of taken as read. Yeah. The multilateral global community really started to come together, and economic growth just accelerated. And the very, very, very large corporates who were expanding globally said to their legal advisors, you've got to come with us, because if you do not come with us, we're going to have to leave you behind, because there's other people who will help us. And that's where all the investment went. I mean, there was obviously day-to-day tech investments. Even back in 1999, for example, Linklaters had Blue Flag. There was tech investment, obviously. E-discovery existed, all this other stuff. But what was taxing everybody's minds, what people were going to conferences and talking about, was globalization. Yeah. Should we merge? Should we take over that law firm? Should we stay independent? There's that massive debate between independent law firms, whatever that means, and global law firms. And Europe was on fire about that. There was law firms were literally splitting in half, because half the partners wanted to join, Clifford Chance. And the other half were like, no, we're going to stay independent. We'll never join an English or an American law firm, And that just went wild for about a decade. And then it kind of settled down. And there's been little bits of global expansion here and there since then. But the truth is, the big strategic plays have mostly been done. But the last great strategic play on a geographical level is the merger of the big US and the big UK firms. We could probably speak all day about that. As you've seen, there have been very, 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 very few. In fact, the big mergers that have taken place are generally the exception to the rule. And I don't know if you want to get into that now, but maybe for another day. But basically, it's something of an impasse. And been at an impasse for at least a decade.
So let's touch on it a little bit, and maybe we can tease it up for another day in more detail. And you're right. So globalization, of course, becomes an important thing. Having these strategic plays are crucially important. Why do you see why do you think there's been so few of these large mergers? Obviously, the difficulties of getting these things to happen aside, why aren't there more of them?
Well, on a basic level, the law firms that wanted to merge and or build their own global networks have pretty much done so. The law firms that wanted to stay independent and a part of Lex Mundi, or have just very, very quietly built their own referral networks, they've done so. There's a whole bunch of very good law firms in New York and California and in London who, without really publicizing it, have built international referral networks, and they're not going to change that. So you're in a situation of law firms in London trying to convince very, very, very good law firms in New York mostly that they should merge together, when generally the US partners are making more money. So you're trying to do a deal going up. Doing business uphill is really difficult. If a very, very profitable US law firm went to a less profitable UK firm and said, "Hey, do you want to merge?" And the net result will be your equity partners make more. We'll probably lose a few of you, but hey, c'est la vie. They'd probably go for the deal, but that's not what's happening. The UK firms are going to richer law firms. And the richer law firms are saying, "Well, what's in it for us?" Frankly, there is a degree of competition globally on a sort of macro scale between New York law and English law in terms of how you frame certain types of contracts. Project finance is very, very, very much an English thing, or at least it used to be. Other types of deals will very much be around New York.
Yeah.
So,
and I think, I guess one of those things is going to be, so do you think that means, and that's why we've seen some of these more partnerships where they are referring business between each other more so than the mergers, because it's kind of a much softer approach, isn't it, to try and accomplish similar things.
And it works. I mean, one of the key reasons for merger is you gain access to new markets, you gain access to new talents, and you get economies of scale. But most of the very large law firms already have that, the ones who wanted it. They've got huge economies. I mean, we're talking law firms that generate over $1 billion annually. It's gigantic. They have economies of scale. In fact, their problem now, as we're seeing with all job cuts and furloughs, is they're too big. So that's not really an issue anymore. I don't know. I suppose an interesting, quite rhetorical question is: will the crisis, if we see a huge drop in income, will that drive more mergers? I think that's possible. That is possible. But again, would it drive US UK mergers? I'm not sure. Again, I think we might see some consolidation in the mid-market, but.
Do you think there's more of a scope in mergers within other territories then? So, there's a UK-US pairing, there's Australia-US, for example, Australia-UK, because it's happened a little bit.
They've done it. I mean, again, it goes the big strategic plays that played out. The Australian law firms or the French law firms, German law firms who wanted to play the global game and fully integrate, they've done it. And the ones who haven't are going to stay there. I think actually probably the bigger strategic question actually is the impact of the ALSPs, the law companies, and of course the Big Four, who are really the growth. They're the growth market. If you were an investor and you could invest, which you can't in most of these, but if you could, that's where a lot of the actual structural growth is coming from.
And I mean, obviously, a lot of them are, some of them are in their infancy, but a lot of them also have the process bit, the business bit down in a much more tighter, regimented fashion than a lot of the law firms. And I'm generalizing here, which means that theoretically, at least, you'll see the growth phase to be quite quick and accelerated. It's not going to be, for law firms, it's taking, let's say, 10 years, and I'm making up these numbers. I think those Big Fours, so ALSPs, can actually get to that point in 2 to 3 years, and also having the lessons learned from what the law firm said in the past.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, if you're focused on the process end, to some degree, there's a lower barrier to entry. I mean, if I was a lawyer and you were a lawyer, and we just said, "Hey, let's start an elite law firm in New York," we just put out a shingle. It would probably take us 100 years, to build the reputation whereby Goldman Sachs started giving us all their work. mean, even if we were great, it would just, to build that reputation, that trust, it takes decades.
Yeah.
It's very, very hard. And interestingly, I suppose we could talk about some of the experiments out in California, but we'll come back to that later. But the ALSPs, it's easier because you're basically saying, give me your volume work, give me what is low to medium complexity. What I'm selling you is not trust in the long-term expertise of our legal knowledge.
Yeah.
So some of these do actually have legal capabilities as well, but not all of them do.
Yeah.
What you're selling is almost consulting and project management, and it's almost like a sort of manufacturing approach.
Yeah.
And as seen in the manufacturing world, like with Tesla, for example, there's a lower barrier to entry if you've got a compelling business model.
Yeah. But then the cost of the initial production line goes up significantly, right? Especially with
that is true. And I think even I mean, and it's interesting actually. I mean, Elevate is a great example how they have consolidated smaller alternative sort of new law businesses, and they've brought those together. They've built something really quite impressive now.
Yeah. And you talked about experiments in California. Do you want to expand on that?
Well, no. Let's come. Well, let's get into the whole technology and.
Sure. No problem. All right. So that's a useful baseline. So we kind of know what's been going on. What's happening? What are you starting to see that's happening in the future? Right. If you had to project and speculate a little bit, we won't go into too much down there looking at the crystal ball. What do you think things are going? And especially given the current climate and the current circumstances that we're in, how are firms, LSPs, corporates, how they're all reacting to this, do you think?
Well, I think fundamentally what this started, well, you could say it started many, many years ago, but there was a real beat in 2008, 2009 with the financial crisis and the beginning of what people call the new normal.
Yeah.
Which when you look back on now, actually it was quite tame. People were like, oh no, the general counsel has called a meeting and they're going to throw someone off the panel. And everyone was like, oh my God, it's the end of the world. Whereas like now it's like standard behavior, requalifying for panels is brutal.
Exactly. Yeah.
GCs, not all GCs, but some of the better ones, and there are some fantastic GCs out there, they really are saying, okay, that's table stakes, that's just hygiene stuff. Let's talk about how do you produce work, how are you unbundling, what are the ALSPs you're working with, are you actually, what type of technology that's a strategic productive value are you actually using? So I don't particularly care about your document management system. I might ask about it in relation to how it integrates with our if we're sending documents to you and so forth, but on a true business level, I mean, what are you going to do for us? Forget about all your press releases. In terms of really engaging with us as a large clients, what are you actually doing? Who are you working with? Can you bring to market a joined up offering? So, and you see what's happening with the law firms. I mean, it's kind of what I wanted to explore, more of you today. Is just the central point is it's all about economics.
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to just make a note. I just got a message from the team. So some people who are watching this, who might be experiencing a slight delay in this, or may not be getting access to the stream. And just know we're recording this, so we will definitely put this up online. So for those of you that might be getting some access issues, just know that's happening. And going back to a conversation, so you're talking about how the good GCs, and you're absolutely right. There's some fantastic GCs out there. I think, if you put things into perspective from a law firm's point of view, yes, the tame realities of the past at that time seemed quite extreme, to be honest. They're essentially asking a lot more questions. They're asking really good questions, and they're asking for a lot more in terms of, look, we are willing to open up a wallet and basically pay for the services, but you have to deliver, and you have to deliver different, and you have to deliver better than you used to 5 years ago or even 12 months ago. And I think that conversation is starting to happen. It's probably not happening, at least from my perspective, it's not happening as much as it should. And it is a two-way street, right? It is that symbiotic relationship where it needs to be the law firm and the clients and the GCs and the corporates, everyone talking together on this.
Yeah, and it's a hard, and it's a very complicated conversation because, you know, you've got buyers and sellers, to put it simply. You know, the sellers are a private business owned by a group of people who work in that business. Their objective is to make as much money as reasonably possible relative to their market segment.
Yeah.
A large commercial law firm, that could be several $1 million per partner. But in their world, that's normal, you know, and so on and so on. From their point of view, they're trying to maximize profits, which of course they should. They're a business.
Their business,
And if they didn't, they would start to lose their best partners to other law firms, and slowly they would go out of business. So it's not just selfishness. There is a degree of enlightened self-interest there.
Yeah.
However, of course, you then get the balance, as in all economic scenarios. You've got the buyers who are under pressure themselves. Now, you know, one of the great challenges has been that the buyers historically were trained by the sellers. So one of the first things that happens when you're a commercial lawyer, a junior associate, is it's drilled into you to fill in your timesheet.
Yeah.
And it's basically, you're basically told, it's like tattooed into your brain.
Yeah.
If you do not fill in your timesheet, you will be out of that door so fast. You will forget you even had a, you know, employment. You know. If you're born into the world in that way, you know, it's quite hard to get out of it. And one of the paradoxes is that a lot of people leave big law firms because they want to escape that environment. They then enter the in-house legal world and then kind of almost unconsciously allow it to be perpetuated by buying time and not pausing to say, well, let's forget about time for a minute, guys.
Yeah.
What is it that we want you to make? We just use a manufacturing term, right?
Yeah.
What are you making for us?
Yeah.
How are you making it? Have you made it before for us? How much did it cost? Could you show us some examples of things you made before that are similar? You know, or maybe we have that information already, but we probably can't find it because, you know, we've got other things to worry about. Let's get our data together. You know, let's start to get some visibility. Let's become conscious of what it is we're actually doing. And I think the biggest problem with the law is people just get trapped in this kind of hamster wheel. You know, you wake up in the morning very early, you get into work, there's a million things to deal with. The lawyers on the private practice side, they're in the same situation. They're under this tremendous pressure. They want to keep everything going. And it just, and so on and so on and so on. I mean, you know, if there's any silver lining that comes out of, you know, this lockdown, it's not just the financial pressure that corporates and, you know, the CEOs and CFOs are going to put on the in-house legal teams, which again will be kind of like 2008 Mark II, so new normal, which is going to add additional pressure. And it's kind of sad that such a blunt instrument has become necessary.
Right.
It's needed a global crisis to get to the point where corporates have actually really stopped and started to analyze what they're spending. Well, actually, to be fair to them, right now, they're not doing that because right now they're in panic survival mode. The sitting back and saying, right, what are we spending? Why are we spending it? Can we reduce it and still have the same quality of output? That will come in the next couple of months. But the downturn that we're going to experience will probably last well into next year, I would imagine. I hope it doesn't, but it probably will, even as the cases drop away. Yeah. So yeah. But at some point, people are going to pause and just say, "Why do we do it like this?"
Yeah, and it's so you talked about, you know, buyers were training buyers are being trained by the sellers, and I think from one perspective, I mean, certainly from the seller's perspective, that's the great position to be in, right? You want to teach your customers how to buy from you. You know, that leads to very successful businesses. And I think, you know, that is level one of it. It's kind of a weird thing. And if you look at what happens in the consumer world, that's how it becomes. People don't know if they want something, you teach them why they want it and how they should buy it. Then they become educated about it and they start asking you difficult questions that you have to hopefully adopt and evolve to be able to answer. And then you go back to, and this is why you need to get it now. So you do want to have that value-driven conversation. And the manufacturing example is good because you need to be able to answer those standard questions on who do you work with? Have you done this before? Do you have process in place? Do you know what you're doing? You know, what is the cost per unit? And all of those things. And if you do that well enough, then theory at least says, then your buyers come to you and say, actually, we want to create something new. You haven't done this before, we haven't done this before, but you've proven yourself to be valuable enough that we should do this together. And that leads to a successful partnership. I don't think we've got to that point yet. I think we've come close a couple of times. And then I like your point about sort of 2008 Mark II and the new normal. I guess one of the things that's very different from that point is now the technology has evolved, right? If you look at what the situation was like, what the world was like at that point, what the tech was like, we're on an exponential curve, which means we are magnitudes of factors faster and further along than we were at that point, not just from a tech point of view, but also people's viewpoints. So how do you think that sort of impacts all of these discussions around looking at spend, looking at what they should buy or not buy, and from whom?
Yeah, well, I mean, just take a step back just for a second. I mean, when people start talking about technology in the legal sector, particularly, it becomes a discussion about technology. It is a discussion about applications working with other applications. It's about the movement of data. It's about integrations, all this kind of stuff, which is absolutely right, makes total sense. If you're head of IT and your job is effectively, or you're in charge of process improvement, and that has to be done. Same as, you need engineers in a ship, otherwise the engine will stop and you'll go nowhere. Absolutely vital. However, if you step back from that individual law firm and you look at the legal market as a whole, and even if you place it actually in a societal setting and say, what is the purpose of the legal market? Purpose of the legal market is to serve the needs of society, which is a rules-based society. So you need legal services. However, society doesn't want a very expensive and inefficient legal market. It has one, and that is now starting to change a little. So to me, the use of technology really doesn't, in the broader sense, doesn't make any sense. There is literally no purpose to it,
right?
Unless there is some beneficial economic output. Now, it gets more complicated, of course, because you've got the buyers and the sellers. So you've got the buyers who are trying to get as good, if not better, outputs for their own business, but at lower cost. And let's be honest, most GCs don't generally think in terms of cutting costs. They don't. I've spoken to hundreds, dozens over the last 20 years. What they want is good quality outcomes. They want to reduce risk. They want to be compliant. They want to protect the business. All these things. If it was a choice between reducing risk and reducing cost would go out the window and reducing risk. So, to them, that is what they're there for. However, eventually you do just get to this point where it's like, well, okay, can we reduce the risk? Can we reduce exposure to various things and cut costs?
Yeah.
Can we be more efficient and get all of these things? Can we get the reduction of risk and meeting of compliance standards and so forth, and the basic amelioration of risk? You kind of see an in-house legal department almost as a kind of risk distributing machine. Mm-hmm. So a corporate absorbs risk by operating in the real world. Things happen, right? Its products kill people, its employees get upset, all kinds of stuff goes wrong. Right. The internal legal function absorbs it almost like an organ, and then distributes out risk. Some of the risk it contains and controls itself, and other risk it sends out to external parties. So, could you go, it talks to an ALSP and says, could you review 10,000 sales agreements for force majeure?
Right.
Go to a top tier New York law firm and says, right, we need some really critical advice because the government of France is going to sue us for antitrust issues.
Yeah.
Right. Sending out the risk, can you solve my risk problems?
Yeah. And I think, so it's almost outsourcing the risk, right? And well, distributing is probably a better word, which is what you use. How then, and we sort of talked about the and as you said, things are a lot simpler sometimes when we talk about them. In practice, they become much more complicated because you do have the buyer and the seller dynamic. So, and what then needs to happen to start bringing about this change? Because and the reason I'm asking this is, if I just take a straw poll of people and say, look, we want to be able to do this. People have been talking about this for a long time. Are you doing this? So like, yes, we're working on it. So what I'm trying to think what the trigger needs to be that actually gets people to do something about it. And we are starting to, and I guess the question becomes, what have you seen where people are actually doing something on this, right? There's some measured success in this area. Excuse me. Yeah.
It's and the irony is that some of the companies that are really looking at root and branch change and really trying to drive efficiency.
Yeah.
These are companies that have like $100 million plus legal spends.
Right.
Some way higher than that.
Right.
And I was talking to one guy who now works at an ALSP, and he said he was working for this huge global American company, and they had a multi-$100 million legal spend.
Yeah.
And they had a sit-down meeting with all the managers, and they said, right, we've got to try and cut this spend. It's insane. I mean, our legal budget is the GDP of a small nation.
Right.
They were just like, how do we stop it? And they sat around and they went around the table a few times, and eventually I just said, we don't know where to start. What would be the point? Got to that point of saying, well, let's look at automating doc review with this AI software. Maybe that will speed things up. Maybe we'll save some money. And they looked at it and they kind of were like, we might save a couple of $100,000. And they were like, well, that's going to be less than 0.1% of our legal spend.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was just so kind of disheartening and demotivating, because the whole thing had got so out of control, and the business itself got so used to just handing over dollops of money, right? Which had come from its customers, which had come from its shareholders. Effectively you could say that this is bad allocation of capital that has become normalized, and it is in effect, and I'm surprised that shareholder activist groups don't pick up on this. It's bad allocation of capital. It's the kind of thing that CEOs get fired for, right? Strangely, for the legal spend, they never do.
Yeah.
So eventually, you just have to get to this point where you say, look, we're just going to start. I guess it's like the whole the analogy of eating an elephant. How do you eat an elephant? You got to start. You either just forget about it.
Yeah.
Just whatever. you start and you realize you're going to have to start small. I mean, even if you use the fanciest technology on the planet, you're only going to make a small dent.
Yeah.
First couple of years in that legal spend. And then, of course, you've got thousands of hygiene things to do. Sort out your knowledge management, figure out where all your documents are, make sure that everything is digitized and machine readable, contract automation for all your standard documents, internal self-serve, build good relationships with ALSPs and with law firms who have process groups of their own. That's all just table stakes, really. And even if you did all of those things and they were all fully embedded, you'd probably still only reduce legal spend by a few percentage points.
Right. And I think that in itself is a big problem, right? So most of these things become a drop in the ocean for certainly the large businesses. And, I think you talked about it a little towards the start, that probably the biggest impact will be in that mid-market space, because actually, not always, but a lot of the time, the businesses that are involved in that space, for them, reducing legal spend by, a factor less will mean big impact for their businesses. And I guess that's one of the things that's in there, right? How vested are you to wanting to make improvements in this area? And I think as individuals, lots of people are. As businesses, I wonder, yes, it might be the bad allocation of capital, but how much does it really matter?
Well, I'd slightly disagree in that I think if you actually look at who is driving change, it is the larger corporates. It's the big banks, the big insurance companies, because they actually have started to eat the elephant. Maybe we could subtitle this
Eating the elephant. Yeah.
Eating elephant.
Yeah.
Sorry to all vegetarians and vegans out there. I have never eaten an elephant, I promise.
Me neither.
The Barclays, HSBC, all the big banks, the big insurance companies, etc. They're getting into it, and they're not silly. They know that doing what they're doing is probably only shaving a few percentage points off, but they're getting into it, and I think it's a long term project. I mean, for me, it's very, very similar to the battle between fossil fuels and electric vehicles and renewable energy.
Right.
We've heard so much about Tesla and electric vehicles and solar power and all of this, right?
Yeah.
The number of electric vehicles in the market that people actually use, it's less than 1%.
That, yeah.
And so, I mean, and it's kind of like that, but everybody knows at the same time, everybody knows, even the oil companies know this. Yeah. Everybody knows that eventually that will be the vast majority of cars, that will be the normal. Yeah. And the oil companies, BP and all the others, will be gone. Yeah. In the next 20, 30 years, or probably 30 years, they'll all be gone.
Yeah. Doing what they're doing today. Yeah. Some of them will likely exist in different forms, right? Hopefully.
Exactly. So, and also going back to your point, actually, sort of, a while ago about exponential, I don't think we're anywhere near exponential yet at all. I think we're really, really at small incremental changes at the moment. We really are. I suppose it's all relative, but it could eventually get exponential in another decade. But it's one of the funniest things is that inside the legal tech bubble, the innovation bubble, it all feels like so much is happening. And if you stand back and you look at the market as a whole, you realize really it's just like this tiny little, bubble of activity, really, in terms of true transformation.
Yeah. And I think, and probably part of that's part of not the problem, but that's certainly part of the thing, right? And I imagine that the hundreds of people who've registered for this and will be coming to this, a lot of them are the converted. They already know and are trying to transform things. And you want to make sure that you're bringing everyone else along, because like you, I'm also in this bubble. So to me, it feels like, wow, we're seeing advancements every day, there are things happening every day. New companies are coming up, new technologies are forming and being invented. But you're right. The reality of the practical world is we still have people who are drafting documents in a paper-based way. We've been talking about automating document creation since probably before I was born, and that's still not happening. We're still talking about, doing things, using technology for improving redlining process. No one should be creating red lines manually right now. This is ridiculous. So, the reality of the world is actually quite far gone. So how again, I think I'll go back to my previous question. How do we drive the change? How do we get people motivated that aren't already converted to this to say, look, the future will be similar to what you see with electric vehicles, with EVs. That will be the norm. Start doing something now, right? How do we start that movement?
I think I'd like to think that, what you're doing, and what Artificial Lawyer and many other, media sites and organizations that do conferences are doing is that they're bringing people together. They're sharing ideas. That's a great start, transparency, data, communication, whether you agree with what everyone's saying or not, it's not necessarily that big an issue. The thing is that people are expressing ideas, sharing, arguing through, even if I write something and someone says, well, I don't really agree with that, but it gets them thinking and they start to engage with the subject. Maybe 12 months later, they might come back and say, actually, no, maybe I do agree with what he said, actually. And, things will start to move forwards a bit.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of good if, I'm happy if people don't agree with me, honestly, and I want you to disagree with me, because there should be a discussion, right? And there is no one person knows all the answers. So it should be a discussion point, and I'm certainly open to changing my thoughts and opinions, because, look, frankly, things change around us, and we have to. And I think that does help. And so we started touching on technology a little bit, and especially Artificial Lawyer as a site. It's heavily focused on technology, it's focused on innovation. It's we see along with the technology changing, and I know you disagree that we're not on the exponential curve, but it is changing. Things are moving. So too I would like to think people are evolving, right? There's, and I think Alan McKay, who's speaking later, he talks about the Jetsons fallacy, that look, you see the Jetsons and the world around you in that cartoon has changed. You have all of these flying cars and all of these, robotic dogs and whatnot, but the people are still the same people as if they were from the Flintstones. That shouldn't be the case, right? The people should move and evolve around with the technology. Is that kind of the core idea behind the artificial lawyer, to get the lawyers to be lawyers 2.0, 3.0, whatever it might be, or what does that mean?
Really, no. I mean, really, artificial lawyer is about the business of law. I'm interested in the legal services sector as a market and how it functions. And the reason why I'm not writing about globalization and law firms trying to merge with each other, which I used to do 20 years ago,
right?
And I became a management consultant, etc., etc. The reason why I'm focused on technology is because this is the most powerful strategic force, the most important strategic issue in the market at the moment. In another 20 years, and I'm sure this will get tapped out, this will plateau out. All the big changes. It's like let's go back to the Tesla example.
Yeah.
When like 85% of all cars are electrical vehicles.
Yeah.
All the magazines and all the TV programs and everyone else who used to go on and on and on about electrical vehicles, it just become like day-to-day life.
Yeah.
Day-to-day life. I'm not naive. I mean, I totally understand that this is a very, very, very small part of the market. But that's why it's fascinating. But from like little acorns, great changes come.
Yeah.
But that's the key point. It's about changing the means of production. It's about changing the way the legal market functions, both on the buy side and the sell side. And the thing that will change it is technology. Technology really will change the equation. And if we just get into sort of like some of the nitty gritty of how law firms work, they effectively sell repackaged inefficiency, bundled up into little packages of time, right? And the buyers say, okay, we accept this inefficiency because it delivers what we want. It ameliorates the risk, right? And this is the trade-off. It's a very strange trade-off. It's like we'll sell you inefficiency for very, very large amounts of money. Your trade-off, your benefit is we will swallow that risk and crunch it for you.
Right.
Where risk distribution, and that's what's happening. The problem is that it's just become too slow, too expensive, too inefficient. And like going back to the point about shareholders and bad allocation of capital. I mean, I know total legal spending remains a relatively small percentage of total revenue, but even so, is there any other department in a large corporation that would be allowed to explicitly buy inefficiency and then be told and the CFO would be told, don't worry about it. In any way you couldn't possibly understand anyway. It's the law, darling. How could you possibly understand? It's way over your head. How could you possibly understand why this document costs $25,000 to make?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the interesting point. And I mean, it's not just legal that in where that happens, but it's certainly most prominent in those kinds of circles. And it does go back to value, because I think there must also be a disconnect. If people are questioning, and people do certainly question the value of the inefficiency, as you put it, that you're delivering, because I think if you show the value as you could be, and I think there's an old adage that there was some issue with some nuclear reactor somewhere. People spent weeks and weeks trying to get a physicist to solve what the problem was, and eventually they found this PhD who comes in and solves the issue, and it takes him 5 minutes, right? And he's like, all right, here's my invoice, here's my bill, whatever it was, for $200,000. And they're like, but it took you 5 minutes. It's like, yeah, it took me 5 minutes but it took me another 20 years to figure out how to think in the way so I can solve this problem in 5 minutes.
Well,
right?
that's a very popular meme.
Adage.
That you hear a lot of. But I mean, I think fundamentally what it's all about is, for me, it goes back to products, right? Law firms make stuff.
Yep.
right? People buy it. Can we suck out of that process all of the work that people shouldn't be doing, and to get the people to focus on what they're best at? You know, it all goes back to that Eric Schmidt quote from about 20 years ago, when someone asked him about the future and so forth. And he said, look, it's not very complicated. You know, computers will do what computers are good at, and people will do what people are good at. And that is basically the motto of artificial lawyer. People often think that artificial lawyer is about, oh, let's replace all the lawyers. It's just it's almost the diametric opposite. I want to see more lawyers. I want to see lawyers really being lawyers. I want to see lawyers not being administrative assistants. I want to see people being paid £200 an hour, not to redline or correct spellings. You know, on documents, which frankly have been repeated by that particular business so many times. They really could be automated almost completely. Although of course you should always have a human in the loop. And get the humans to be doing what they're really good at, which is going to go and talk to a client and using their intuition, their deep intelligence, the way that the human mind works to come up with creative solutions, which you just cannot replace, really. And frankly, even if you could, you know, I said this in an article the other day about the importance of keeping some things analog and human. Even if you could replace them, I never, ever, ever want to live in a world where judges their decisions are automated. I think it's a terrible idea. Much as having surveillance cameras with AI systems that automatically take a photograph of you, and then decide that you're not allowed to come into that building for some reason. And when you say, well, why was that decision made? It's, oh, we can't tell you that. I mean, humans start to get squeezed out of a loop, and that's completely the wrong application of technology. It's the wrong application of automation. The correct application is
let's come back to the analog point, because I do want to go into a lot more detail actually there. Just something that you talked about, you know, how lawyers want to be lawyers and you're making stuff. I mean, what is interesting, if you look within law firms specifically, you have 50% of the total staff that aren't lawyers. Maybe a bit less, maybe a bit more. And, you know, you have to think about, okay, if you look at the business cost, what do we do? How do we improve these efficiencies? And someone actually tweeted me this question asking, like, so innovation should be, and I'm paraphrasing here, it should be a strategic issue. How do we use technology to relieve some of the pressures within the business, right? Whilst ensuring that, and I think this goes to a lot of the fear that, look, if we embrace technology, people will be out of jobs, whether they're lawyers or otherwise. You know, so how do you sort of?
I would say, well, first of all, I would say, if your job can ethically and reasonably be very easily replaced with technology, and going back to my former point about just because you can automate it doesn't mean you should. And just because you can automate it doesn't mean it's ethical or right. But if it was ethical, if it was sensible to do so, and your job is basically such a process task, such as your job is to pick up a bunch of physical paper documents and get a red marker and, like, I don't know, highlight certain items. I'm sorry, but that is a bad waste of your education. You know, people in the West generally have huge amounts of education before they enter the legal market, at great expense to themselves and the state. And then they end up doing work that really, quite genuinely, some very basic software could do in about 5 seconds. That's not helping anybody. It's, again, bad allocation of capital on a macro scale throughout the entire economy. And I mean, I write about the legal sector because I ended up by accident inside it. But all of this applies to every other profession. Accounting, surveyors, you name it. Journalism, you know, although some would argue journalism isn't a profession, but you're right, I don't know. But you know, it's anything really that is weighing down, that is this like ridiculous like process albatross around the neck of society and the economy. Yeah, of course automate it if it's ethically sensible to do so. And then, so in some ways, it's a roundabout way of answering your question, which is, so big law firm, let's say it's got 5,000 people, 2,500 of those effectively provide support for the 2,500 fee earners, right?
Yep.
So I mean, let's pull that apart. Does that law firm, the business, the entity, need all of those fee earners in a much more efficient world to do what it needs for clients? Well, it's an interesting question. And the thing is that if it became more efficient, the people doing lower value work could potentially, if the partners can keep winning new work, take that work in. So it becomes like, it's like a jet engine. You know, the more input, more output. Takes off, goes faster. So making a law firm's fee earners more efficient does not mean redundancies. It could actually mean a much more powerful business. Business support, as I said, if people are doing stuff that is effectively now redundant, well, I'm sorry, but you know.
And I mean, the other thing, as you increase efficiencies, that means that people generally have more time to think about different ways of delivering services, creating products, and so on, which does mean, in many cases, not all, that actually new roles come up, right? And that's one of the things that people do worry about. What will happen if all of these things become automated? Well, new things will come up that we need to do.
Well, but like I said, I mean, I just, the quantity of things that really, really can be automated, in fact, it's actually not that large, particularly in the legal world. I mean, it's just that the legal market is built on a pyramid of leverage and efficiency. So equity partners, salaried partners, senior associates, junior associates, paralegals, then down into the LSPs, down into the LPOs, and on it goes. Gigantic pyramid, some of it inside an entity, some of it with connected entities below each productive layer. You know, it's got to change. It's got to change. I mean, if you go back a couple of decades, it wasn't like this. Right. Law firms were much smaller, much tighter. There was hardly any leverage, and then people realized that by upping the leverage, they could become more profitable. But equally, the clients allowed it because also there was a gigantic growth in legal demand. And it's one of the things people kind of forget. You know, some people kind of go like, why do the big corporate firms make so much money? Well, globalization, demand for legal services generally, except in crisis times like this, always goes up. Yeah, and it's just fed. It's just fed, and the more and more legal data, you know, corporates get larger and larger. So when there is a deal, the number of documents they have to review are gigantic, you know, in quantity, and all of that just feeds this pyramid. And I think I think goes back to your original point, which is have we got to this kind of turning point, you know? And I think we have. I think we've got to the last 20, 30 years of economic growth in the West, and you know, and Asia, and particularly China, has just pushed us forward as well. We've got to the point now where the leverage pyramid, I think, is bigger than it needs to be, and that's why we're seeing the ALSPs being so successful, and so many of the bigger law firms developing, you know, their own process groups. You know, they can see the writing on the wall, and they're getting prepared. And you know, and part of that is technology, because you know, do you really want to have 200 people in a warehouse? Again, doing stuff that is basically automatable. You need humans in the loop, quality checking, making sure the output makes sense. You know, all of that, of course, you do. Absolutely.
And I think that's probably a good segue to, you know, you started talking about, I cut you off before, around things that should stay analog. And you know, you said there's not many things within the legal supply chain that can be automated, or at least in a creative enough way, or should be automated. Should be, maybe it's a better.
I think what I would say is totally automated. There's lots of stuff that partially should be automated, and probably should. But I don't think advice should be automated. Appearances in court, obviously not. Or you know, there's basically what lawyers used to get paid for. Don't automate it. You know?
Well, that's the thing, right? The human element where you are interacting with individuals, because I think it is sometimes easy to forget that there's a big human element to this, including within sort of corporate settings, actually taking instructions from your client. You know, it becomes your role as a lawyer to try and interpret from, you know, what they're telling you and the emotions they feel, what actions that you need to be able to take. So, and before you give them advice, and that becomes very challenging to fully automate.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I was at a conference, one of the last things I went to before the lockdown in Belfast, and there was a company there that said they'd saved a ton of money. I think they were an insurance company. They'd automated their helpline, and you spoke to an automated chatbot. And some readers will be surprised by this, but I think that's a terrible idea.
Right.
When you've got an emergency,
Yeah.
like your bathroom is flooded, and you're going, oh my God, and you're absolutely losing it, and you get on the phone to the insurance company to help you with an emergency plumber and all the other stuff. The last thing you want is a blooming chatbot.
Yeah.
You go, I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah.
You do not want that. You want a real person who can actually understand. And also, I think it's interesting actually. I had a situation the other day where I'd done some consulting work. I was just talk for a very, very large legal tech company. I won't mention their name. I don't want to embarrass them. And for some reason, something was missing from the invoice or something.
Right.
And it had taken 6 months to get paid. And I'd been in contact with their accounts department, who was actually an accounting company that was outsourced.
Okay. Right.
And they just had this computer says no system. And I just kept sort of like sending emails saying, like, can someone just please speak to the person who's in charge of that particular invoice and just say, look, we've looked at your case and it doesn't matter that this piece of information is missing.
Yeah.
The guy lives in England. He's not based in the country where that
company
is. And just overrule it and just and pay it. But they couldn't, because they'd hard coded the system. With there was only the human in the loop was basically there to just press return.
Right.
There was no decision making capability, and I mean that was a beautiful moral lesson in over automating and taking people out of the loop where they should stay in the loop.
Right. Well, and actually putting people in the right place in the loop, right? In that example, to ensure that, because there is a point in your example of where your house is flooded or there's a fire, whatever. There's an element to, yes, you need something there that's able to most efficiently and effectively resolve the issue. That's a part of that. And maybe you can do some partial automation to collect the information. But there is also the other part of the empathetic individual, because frankly, a lot of the times, and I have so much respect for anyone who works in any sort of support function, when you get called, when people are basically under fire a little bit, they actually don't care whether you're able to solve their problems for the first couple of minutes, right? They just want you to be the person they can just yell at sometimes, or just yell to, or just vent. And that's important. And sometimes the automated systems don't actually they make it worse, because you're just repeating yourself over and over again without sometimes it going through fully. That's an important element to that.
Exactly. And what the automation should be doing, it should be, let's say you've got a voice recognition system. It's listening to what you're saying. It's going off into some very, very well organized KM system. It's using natural language processing, which has been trained up through machine learning to actually be useful and actually return beneficial results. It starts popping up things on the screen of the advisor saying, it looks like it's one of these, we've done 10,000 of these, these are probably the next three things. It's like NHS 111. And it says, right, okay, you need to, right, the person will probably be in this particular situation, you should ask them this, you should tell them that. And but it's all kind of like, it's like a serving suggestion. It doesn't,
it's a prompt.
I mean, and for me, it goes that kind of logic. It's for the whole, it's the ethos of artificial law. The stuff that should be automated, automate it. The stuff that should be done by people, keep it, and in fact expand that. I think if we look at the long-term future of the economy, we're going to have to. Because as more and more very basic process jobs, like making sandwiches for pret-a-manger, which literally thousands of people do, right? That work is going to go eventually. Everyone knows it's going to go.
Right.
I mean, in 100 years, if people are still kind of doing that all day, 8 hours a day, that would be a tremendous waste of human
potential.
For sure. Those jobs are going to go. So we do need to think about how we can make better use of people. So ultimately, what we're actually going to see, we're going to see more higher value human labor. I certainly hope so.
Yeah. And I would say, just to bring this back to the legal profession, and we have about 6 or so minutes. So I'm looking through some of the questions as well. What do you think is how does that apply to this? So we talked a lot about a lot of different things, but one of the core theses were around making sure that the delivery aspect of it is understood, right? That you're doing this and we talked about those really good GCs who are asking the right questions. How do we, as we think about moving the economy forward, and how we think about moving the legal profession forward, the next stage of that, so to speak, what should those conversations include? What kind of questions should people be asking each other, whether they're from the lawyer perspective or from the GC or corporate perspective?
Well, for the GCs, I would say what you should probably do first, of course, keep engaging with your advisors, and you will be anyway, because there'll always be new legal stuff you have to deal with. But I would say quietly go away with some of your team and start analyzing your own data. If you want to really get on top of this, know thyself. In the ancient Greek temple, know thyself. And how does a corporate legal function know itself? Well, it understands what it makes. It prices it. It looks at how things are made. It looks where there are standardizations that can be made in contracts, in clause types, in processes. The connecting workflows, which may not actually even be legal workflows. There might be things related to collecting emails or sending documents to certain repositories and so forth, or flagging up information that goes off to a risk manager somewhere else in the business. Automating those little things, get all of that sorted. Get your data and your processes transparent. Know yourself. That can be the subheading. Eat elephants and
know yourself. I think that's a wonderful place to start wrapping up. So Richard, for anyone who doesn't know you already, what's a good place to start reading some more of your thoughts, your findings, and other things of that nature?
Well, I would say just go to Artificial Lawyer. It's a mix of news and views. There's news, which is the usual updates on what's happening, but there's plenty of think pieces, both by third parties and myself. So, and of course, I always invite interesting think pieces. Can never get enough of those.
Awesome. And I know you're also putting on a conference, which will probably, and I'm fully conscious that we touched a lot of topics in not too much detail. So for others that do want to probably delve in a lot deeper, and I know you're inviting other guests on as well. What's the conference? When is it? Feel free to plug it here.
Okay, thank you. Well, so legalinnovatorsonline.com. Legal Innovators Online, or if you can't find it, just go onto Artificial Lawyer, you'll find it quickly. It's a 3-day digitally sort of constructed conference. The idea is that we will have a virtual exhibition space. Delegates and attendees can actually talk to each other. It's not going to be just like a Zoom call. It's actually going to be as close as we can get it to a real actual live conference. It's going to be 3 days, 19th, 20th and 21st of May, and it's going to be each afternoon English time, and we're doing it in the afternoon so the American audience can also join. And the first day is about GCs, and then the second 2 days are about different aspects of the legal market in general. We've got some fantastic speakers, and we're still adding speakers, and it should be good. It's going to be panels and presentations, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Richard. Wonderful having you on, and I look forward to continuing to follow your work on Artificial Lawyer and elsewhere. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.